On the afternoon of August the 15th, 1941, a petite 24-year-old Belgian woman walked unannounced into the British consulate in Bilbao, Spain. With her were three bedraggled Allied soldiers. She had just guided them across 800 kilometers of Nazi-occupied territory and over the Pyrenees Mountains. The British diplomats simply could not believe her. How could this slight, attractive young woman, looking barely 20, have accomplished such a feat? They suspected a German trap. Yet Andrée de Jong, codenamed Dédée, would prove them spectacularly wrong. Over the next 17 months, this quiet Belgian woman would accomplish what entire armies had failed to do. Time and again, she would lead Allied flyers out of Nazi-held Europe, marching them through the Pyrenees with nothing but grit, faith, and a map burned into memory. In all, she guided 118 men to safety, crossing those mountains 24 separate times, while the organization she built, later called the Comet Line, rescued more than 700 Allied servicemen. It would become the most efficient underground escape route of the Second World War. When the war first erupted, Andrée was just 23. Born in the small Belgian town of Schaerbeek in 1916, she had grown up under the shadow of the previous German occupation. Her father, Frederick, a village schoolmaster, raised her to believe that injustice was something you confronted, not endured. He affectionately called her Little Cyclone, a name that foretold the unstoppable force she would become. As a girl, she had been captivated by the story of Edith Cavell, the British nurse executed in her hometown for sheltering Allied soldiers during the Great War. That legend burned into her imagination. By the time she finished nursing school, she had decided she wanted a life that meant something, even if it cost her everything. When Hitler's troops invaded Belgium in May 1940, she rushed to Brussels, volunteered with the Red Cross, and began aiding captured Allied fighters. At first, she helped them send letters home and found temporary hiding places. But she soon realized that secrecy was not enough. They needed a road back to freedom, so she built one. With a handful of friends, Arnold Deppe, Henri Deleclique, and Baron Jacques Donny, she created a small cell of helpers that would grow into a lifeline spanning countries. They were betrayed almost immediately. One of their number was caught, and the rest went into hiding. Still, Andrée refused to stop. By mid-1941, she had moved her operations south, linking with the de Greef family near the Spanish border. Elvire de Greef, codenamed Tante Go, became the soul of the Southern Line. Her husband worked as an interpreter for the Germans, a dangerous cover that gave them access to blank papers, official seals, and precious ration cards. Their teenage daughter, Janine, delivered messages by bicycle and became the youngest courier on the route. Their first attempt to cross into Spain went terribly wrong. Several escapees were captured, and Andrée learned a brutal lesson. She would have to accompany the men herself all the way to safety. A month later, she tried again, and this time succeeded. 3 exhausted airmen reached the British consulate in Bilbao, alive and free, but success brought suspicion. The diplomats who met her could hardly believe the story. She looked barely 20, frail, polite. Surely she was a decoy for a German trap. Weeks passed before London finally verified her tale. When she returned in October with more Allied airmen in tow, doubt turned into astonishment. From that point on, British intelligence funded her network, though she insisted on running it her own way. She refused radios, refused oversight, and refused to let anyone who didn't understand the danger make her decisions for her. The standard route she designed was a masterpiece of precision. From Brussels to Paris by train, from Paris to the southwest by night express, then onward to Bayonne by bicycle or foot. The final leg, a grueling 8-hour trek over the Pyrenees in darkness, carried the fugitives into Spain, where they could reach Gibraltar and fly home to Britain. Because of its speed and brilliance, her network was given the name Comet. Before every journey, Andrée would gather the airmen and tell them quietly, "My name is Andrée, but you can call me by my code name, Dédée. From now on, I'll be your little mother and you'll be my children. My job is to get my children home." At first the men laughed, uneasy that their lives rested in the hands of a young woman. But by the second day, the laughter stopped. She moved through occupied territory with such calm authority that even hardened soldiers followed without question. Her greatest advantage was the one no enemy could see coming. She didn't look dangerous. To the German patrols, she was just another girl on a train. They couldn't imagine that this little mother commanded a network of 3,000 helpers across France and Belgium. Most of them were women. They ran safe houses, forged documents, and guided travelers disguised as farmhands or students. Each link in the chain knew only a few others. Secrecy was survival. Airmen were referred to as parcels, messages as letters, and escorts as postmen. The crossings were perilous. The mountains claimed lives even without the Germans' help. Snowstorms, swollen rivers, exhaustion, each journey demanded more than courage. It demanded faith. Florentino Goicoechea, a Basque smuggler who became André's most trusted guide, made over 70 crossings himself. He once carried an injured pilot for 18 miles through snow and darkness, but no matter how careful they were, betrayal found them. German intelligence paid handsomely for information, and the Comet Line was repeatedly infiltrated. The worst came in late 1943, when an agent named Jacques Desubris secretly joined the network and exposed dozens of operatives. Arrests rippled across Belgium. On a freezing January night in 1943, the betrayal reached Andrée herself. While hiding with 3 British airmen near Urugna, the safe house was surrounded by the Gestapo. She was captured and interrogated for months in Brussels and Paris. Her interrogators refused to believe she was in charge. They were certain a man must be behind her. That disbelief saved her life. Because they classified her as a mere courier rather than a leader, she was sentenced to imprisonment instead of execution. She spent 28 months in concentration camps, first Ravensbrück, then Mauthausen. Conditions defied imagination: starvation, forced labor, the constant shadow of death. Yet she kept her composure and even organized small acts of defiance, helping others survive one day at a time. When American troops liberated the camp in April 1945, Andrée weighed less than 80 pounds. Her father, captured 2 years earlier, had already been executed by the Nazis. In his final letter, he wrote that he was proud to die knowing his little cyclone had carried on their fight. By war's end, the cost of freedom was staggering. Nearly 300 of the Comet Line's 3,000 volunteers were killed or died in captivity. But the results were beyond measure. Hundreds of Allied soldiers made it home because one woman refused to quit. After the war, Andrée received medals from Belgium, Britain, France, and the United States. In 1946, she stood in Buckingham Palace as King George VI pinned the George Medal to her uniform. Decades later, she would be made a countess, though titles meant little to her. She returned to what she'd once trained for, nursing, and devoted her life to caring for leprosy patients across Africa. Congo, Cameroon, Ethiopia, wherever the sick were shunned, she went. When an English novelist, Graham Greene, met her in the 1950s and asked why she'd chosen such difficult work, she answered softly, "Because this was the dream I postponed for the war." Few of her patients knew that the quiet, nurse tending their wounds had once outwitted the Gestapo and crossed mountains to save. She died in 2007 at the age of 90, buried beside her parents in the town where she'd been born and where Edith Cavell had once inspired her. Today, a street in Brussels bears her name. Each year, hikers retrace the Comet route through the Pyrenees, walking the same ridges she once climbed under moonlight. Her story remains one of history's greatest paradoxes. The very things that made people doubt her, her youth, her appearance, her gender, became the shields that protected her. The British suspected she was a trap. The Germans thought she couldn't possibly lead a resistance. Both underestimated her, and both were wrong. What Andrée de Jong built wasn't only a network of escape, it was a network of faith. She proved that courage has no uniform, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room can move mountains, literally. For the hundreds of Allied airmen who returned home because of her, and for the generations who exist because of them, she will always be the little mother who never stopped leading her children toward freedom.